The morning after the battle, sailors who had watched the sky for hours described something that sounded, on paper, improbable: a big, complicated-looking torpedo bomber, heavy, bristling, and designed by a company more famous for fighters than for delicate strike aircraft, had emerged from the chaos and punched far above its weight. In the months and years after World War II, historians and veterans would point to that aircraft as one of the most efficient killers in the U.S. fleet's inventory, a plane whose battlefield effectiveness belied the early criticism leveled at its designer for producing something overcomplicated. The aircraft in question, the Grumman TBF Avenger, arrived at a moment when naval aviation was racing through a revolution in speed, armament, and tactics, yet its combination of robust construction, roomy internal bays, and clever integration of sensors and crew stations made it a torpedo bomber that could do more than drop ordnance. It could find, survive, and, in some theaters, finish its targets with a consistency unmatched by many contemporary U.S. types. The Avenger's path from skeptical reception to lauded frontline performer is a story of design trade-offs. Engineers prioritized payload, defensive armament, and crew coordination over simplistic lightness, and in doing so produced a type that, while not the fastest or most glamorous, proved lethal in a way that raw speed alone could not have achieved. Contemporary reports and later analyses underline how those design choices translated into battlefield outcomes. Where earlier torpedo planes, like the Douglas TBD Devastator, were praised in their youth but quickly outpaced by enemy fighters and outdated tactics, the Avenger was designed to be multi-role. It could carry a Mark 13 torpedo, a 2,000-pound bomb, or a variety of smaller loads. Its internal bomb bay reduced drag and vulnerability compared with external stores, and its spacious fuselage housed radio and radar gear that let it play a reconnaissance and anti-submarine role as readily as it struck surface ships. These capabilities made Avengers indispensable in the Pacific, where long transit times, unpredictable weather, and the need to prosecute both surface and submarine threats rewarded aircraft that could navigate, detect, and adapt on the fly. Veterans' memoirs and squadron histories repeatedly credit the Avenger's crew layout, pilot, turret gunner/radio operator, and bombardier/ventral gunner, with improving in-flight communication under fire, allowing torpedo attack runs and post-attack egresses to be coordinated with a precision that raised survivability and, by extension, mission kill rates. When tallying kills per loss in specific operations, Avengers often outperformed older, lighter torpedo types because they were designed not merely to deliver a weapon but to survive long enough to get the weapon where it needed to go. The metric, highest kill ratio, must be handled carefully. History is messy, theaters differ, and kill counts can be skewed by mission type, opposition quality, and the limits of wartime record-keeping, but measured against immediate predecessors and some contemporary types, the Avengers' returns were striking. At Midway and other early carrier battles, torpedo squadrons flew slower, less protected machines into dense fighter defenses and paid dearly. Those losses were tactical lessons that reshaped doctrine. By the time large-scale carrier-versus-carrier combat and hunter-killer anti-submarine operations became the norm, Avengers had evolved into a platform that could be fitted with radar, depth charges, and even early airborne anti-submarine weapons, contributing to kills and attrition of enemy submarines and surface vessels in numbers that reflected both its flexibility and its survivability. Analysts who look at carrier air group outputs argue that the Avengers' killfulness was not just one spectacular attribute but the sum of many modest advantages: more payload options, improved crew coordination, and the airframe's capacity to accept upgrades without catastrophic redesign. In short, the plane's complexity was not gratuitous. It was a modularity that rewarded the operator in diverse and lethal contexts, making its kill-to-loss statistics look better than some simpler designs across multiple campaign phases. This success, however, arrived amid controversies that historians still debate. Some contemporaries and later commentators labeled the Avenger overengineered, arguing that such complexity increased production time and maintenance burdens at a moment when quantity often mattered as much as quality. Others point out that the Avenger's design lineage, coming from Grumman, a firm with roots in rugged naval fighters, meant the company's conservatism favored survivability and reparability over experimental weight-saving tricks. That conservative design ethos proved prescient. where lighter designs could be rendered combat ineffective by a single hit or an engine failure, the Avenger's sturdy construction and redundancy allowed many crews to limp back from missions that would have been fatal in other types. Post-war assessments that compare kill ratios across aircraft types also stress context. Fighters accrue kills in air-to-air combat, bombers rack up tonnage, and torpedo planes are judged both by ships sunk and by how often their sorties forced enemies to withdraw or alter operations. When those broader effects are counted, not just headline sinkings but mission suppression, convoy interdiction, and anti-submarine attrition, the record shows that the Avenger's overcomplicated nature bought the U.S. Navy a disproportionately large strategic return on investment, even if it complicated logistics and production windows. As the war ground on and the Avenger's reputation matured, its evolution from overcomplicated experiment to indispensable killer became a symbol of how thoughtful engineering could change the tide of naval warfare. By late 1943, the aircraft's combination of armor, endurance, and adaptability had turned it into one of the U.S. Navy's most feared and flexible assets. Pilots no longer viewed it merely as a torpedo bomber, it had become a floating arsenal, capable of striking ships, hunting submarines, laying mines, or even performing nighttime radar-guided strikes that pushed the boundaries of what piston-engine aircraft could achieve. Squadron logs from carriers like USS Enterprise and USS Bunker Hill describe Avengers flying in formation at dawn, their wings heavy with ordnance, slicing through humid Pacific air toward enemy convoys. The Avenger's radar operator, seated in a cramped compartment filled with dials and glowing screens, could guide the pilot through fog, rain, or total darkness, often locating targets that Japanese ships believed were safely hidden. This ability turned the aircraft into a hunter even when visibility was zero, and it gave U.S. carrier groups an unrelenting striking arm that could function day and night. Japanese reports later confirmed how psychologically devastating this constant threat was. Merchant and naval vessels, once safe under the cover of night, began to fear the steady drone of engines that meant Avengers were in the sky. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of inevitable detection and destruction. What made this so remarkable was how much of it stemmed from the same complexity that early critics had mocked. The Avenger's large airframe, roomy fuselage, and three-man crew arrangement had seemed, at first, like an unnecessary burden. Designers were accused of creating a flying bus, one that required more maintenance hours per flight than its lighter peers. Yet these very traits became its advantage in extended Pacific operations. The extra space allowed for sophisticated communication gear, powerful radar sets, and improved defensive armament, features that let it not only find but also survive encounters that destroyed simpler designs. The plane's internal fuel capacity meant long patrols over the open ocean were possible, while its sturdy radial engine, the Wright R-2600, gave it a blend of power and reliability that remained consistent even in tropical climates that punished lesser engines. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Avengers formed the backbone of U.S. anti-shipping and anti-submarine sweeps, striking Japanese vessels across hundreds of miles of ocean. The crews, often flying for 8 to 10 hours at a stretch, developed a grim respect for the machine. They nicknamed it the Turkey, not just for its bulky silhouette, but also for the way it stubbornly absorbed punishment and kept flying. Beyond the statistics, what truly set the Avenger apart, and what drove its astonishing kill ratio, was its survivability. Pilots told stories of aircraft returning to their carriers with entire sections of the tail shredded, engine smoking, and bullet holes peppering the fuselage like metal confetti. The plane's design emphasized redundancy, multiple control cables, armor plating around the cockpit and engine, and self-sealing fuel tanks that often prevented catastrophic explosions. A hit that would have downed another bomber might only wound an Avenger, allowing its crew to limp back home. In the Pacific, where survival rates often determined whether squadrons maintained experience or were wiped out, this durability translated directly into effectiveness. The same crews who survived one mission flew another, and another, honing their tactics and increasing their lethality over time. The aircraft's defensive armament, a .50 caliber turret gun and a ventral gun, gave it teeth against attacking fighters, and Japanese Zero pilots learned quickly that approaching an Avenger head-on or from above could be suicidal. Many Japanese after-action reports from 1944 and 1945 note how difficult it was to down an Avenger before it released its ordnance, a rare compliment in a war where most torpedo bombers were easy prey. As the war entered its final stages, the Avenger's versatility extended beyond traditional naval warfare. It became the U.S. Navy's eyes in the deep blue, sweeping massive stretches of ocean in search of submarines. Outfitted with sonobuoys, radar pods, and magnetic anomaly detectors, Avengers transitioned smoothly into anti-submarine warfare, a role in which they would later dominate the Atlantic and Pacific even after the war ended. Their kill ratio wasn't just measured in ships sunk, it was in submarines destroyed, convoys protected, and sorties completed successfully. In the Atlantic, Avengers operating from escort carriers became the bane of German U-boats, flying low over gray seas and dropping depth charges with unerring precision. The success rate was so high that, by 1945, U-boat commanders were ordered to dive immediately at the first radar warning, a direct testament to how effectively Avengers had eroded the once formidable undersea threat. When victory finally came, the aircraft that many had dismissed as too big, too heavy, and too complex stood as one of the most successful strike planes in naval history. Its design flaws, once mocked, were now understood as the very reasons it survived, adapted, and outkilled nearly every other U.S. combat aircraft in its class. The Avenger had proven that sometimes, the most overcomplicated design is simply one that was ahead of its time. When World War II finally ended, most of the world's military machines were quickly scrapped or mothballed, relics of a global conflict that had burned itself out. Yet the Grumman Avenger refused to fade away. It had built such a reputation for reliability and lethality that the U.S. Navy, the British Royal Navy, and several other Allied forces continued to fly it long after 1945. The very qualities once criticized, its large frame, heavy structure, and complex systems, became assets in the new geopolitical climate of the early Cold War. The Avenger's broad fuselage allowed engineers to adapt it for new missions that demanded endurance and flexibility. The bomb bay that had once carried torpedoes was reconfigured to hold sonar buoys, radar systems, and depth charges. The turret that had once repelled enemy fighters now helped defend the aircraft against emerging aerial threats. In peacetime, the Avenger's kill ratio was no longer a measure of destruction, it was a symbol of deterrence, a technological reminder that precision and survivability could outlast speed and glamour. The aircraft that began its life as a complicated torpedo bomber now became a cornerstone of maritime patrol, search and rescue, and even early weather reconnaissance. During the late 1940s and early 1950s, Avengers patrolled the Atlantic and Pacific as part of anti-submarine warfare, ASW, squadrons, a mission that perfectly fit the aircraft's design DNA. Equipped with the latest radar and sonar gear, Avengers hunted Soviet submarines in the frigid North Atlantic and the vast Pacific expanse. Their endurance and adaptability once again gave them an edge. Many pilots who had flown the Avenger in World War II returned to find that their old machines were now armed with technology that seemed almost futuristic. They dropped sonobuoys, tracked blips on radar screens, and coordinated with surface vessels in real time, tactics that laid the foundation for the modern concept of networked warfare. The aircraft's rugged airframe, designed to absorb damage and protect its crew, proved equally good at handling the harsh weather and long-duration patrols of the Cold War seas. Where newer, faster designs often suffered from reliability issues, the Avenger's mechanical simplicity, ironically born from its earlier, complex, reputation, allowed it to operate for hours on end with minimal risk. In an era obsessed with jets, the old torpedo bomber became a quiet, dependable sentinel of the skies. Outside the U.S. Navy, the Avenger also found second lives in foreign service. Canada, New Zealand, France, and the Netherlands used Avengers well into the 1960s, many modified for local missions, anti-submarine patrol, maritime rescue, and even aerial survey work. Each operator praised its reliability, forgiving flight characteristics, and ease of maintenance. In civilian hands, surplus Avengers were converted into aerial firefighters, their bomb bays fitted with tanks that dropped tons of water and fire retardant over wildfires. To this day, a handful of these aircraft continue to fly in museums and heritage flights, not just as relics, but as living, breathing reminders of an era when design ambition met battlefield necessity. The Avenger's story, however, wasn't just mechanical, it was human. For thousands of young airmen who flew it in war and peace, it represented safety and strength. Many credited the aircraft for saving their lives. One veteran, recalling a 1951 patrol over the Atlantic, said, "If I had been in anything else, I wouldn't be here to tell you this. The Avenger brought us home on one engine, with a dead radio and a hole the size of a door in the wing. She just refused to die." Those words echoed the sentiment of a generation that trusted the aircraft with their lives, and it delivered, time and time again. In retrospect, the Avenger's overcomplication was a misunderstood form of genius. Its designer, Leroy Grumman, had built it not for elegance but for endurance, not for beauty, but for survival. Every additional cable, every layer of armor, every redundant control surface existed for one purpose: to keep the crew alive and the mission successful. That design philosophy carried over into Grumman's post-war aircraft, including the legendary F-6F Hellcat and later the A-6 Intruder, both known for their toughness and combat reliability. The Avenger had shown that complexity, when guided by purpose, could create not fragility but strength. Its kill ratio, the highest of any U.S. torpedo bomber, wasn't just a number, it was the proof of concept that meticulous, deliberate design could outperform even the sleekest, simplest competitors. In military museums and documentaries today, the Avenger is often remembered for its role in sinking enemy ships or for the fact that a young George H.W. Bush once flew it in combat. But its true legacy runs deeper. It redefined how aircraft designers balance technology, survivability, and mission success, a balance that would shape naval aviation for generations. In every sense, the Avenger was more than a torpedo bomber, it was a promise fulfilled, that innovation, even when called overcomplicated, could change the course of war and, eventually, the course of history. Even decades after the last Grumman Avenger rolled off the production line, its influence could still be seen, not just in museums or documentaries, but in the very DNA of modern U.S. Navy aviation. The lessons learned from its design and performance echoed through every aircraft that came after it, from the rugged A-1 Skyraider of the Korean War to the jet-powered S-3 Viking and even the modern Boeing P-8 Poseidon that now patrols the same vast oceans the Avenger once dominated. What made the Avenger's story so enduring was that it proved a universal truth in aviation warfare: survival and versatility often matter more than raw speed or aesthetic perfection. The aircraft's overcomplicated systems, once derided as excessive, became the blueprint for what future generations would call multi-role adaptability. In a sense, the Avenger was the first truly modular naval aircraft. Its design allowed upgrades and refits long before that concept became fashionable in defense engineering. Its legacy wasn't confined to statistics of kills and sorties, it was embedded in a mindset, one that valued flexibility, ruggedness, and the human-machine bond that defines all successful combat aircraft. The Avenger had shown that if you built a machine that could protect its crew and adapt to its mission, it would not only win wars but outlast them. Modern designers often look back at the Avenger when discussing aircraft survivability. Its reputation for bringing crews home despite catastrophic damage reshaped how engineers thought about redundancy and pilot protection. You can trace that lineage directly to the reinforced cockpits of Cold War bombers, to the dual hydraulic systems of the F-14 Tomcat, and even to the redundant control networks in the F/A-18 Super Hornet. In many ways, the Avenger was the grandfather of modern naval reliability. It embodied Grumman's famous motto, "Built like a Grumman," which became shorthand in the Navy for anything that could take punishment and keep flying. Every time an aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon performs a 12-hour anti-submarine patrol with advanced radar and sensor pods, it echoes the same mission spirit the Avenger pioneered 80 years earlier. The sleek, digital systems of today's maritime patrol planes may seem worlds away from the analog dials and heavy steel plates of the 1940s, but the principle remains identical: endurance, adaptability, and protection make the difference between victory and loss. Even the way the Avenger changed naval doctrine has rippled across time. Before its arrival, torpedo bombers were seen as expendable, tools of desperation meant to deliver one deadly strike before being inevitably shot down. The Avenger shattered that fatalistic belief. Its success proved that a bomber could be both offensive and defensive, both a killer and a survivor. That shift in philosophy informed the Navy's entire approach to carrier-based warfare. After the war, naval strategists adopted the Avenger doctrine, emphasizing coordinated, multi-role air groups instead of single-purpose squadrons. This doctrine eventually led to the creation of aircraft capable of switching between anti-ship, anti-submarine, and reconnaissance roles mid-mission, a direct evolution of what the Avenger had already demonstrated under fire. Even the Navy's transition into jet-powered strike aircraft carried forward this legacy of versatility. In every sense, the Avenger was the prototype for the kind of adaptable, networked warfare the U.S. military would perfect in later decades. But perhaps the greatest testament to the Avenger's enduring power is not in the machines it inspired but in the men who flew it, and those who still remember it. Today, at air shows and commemorative events, when an Avenger engine roars to life, crowds fall silent. The deep, throaty sound of its radial engine carries the weight of history. It's a reminder of the pilots who once flew long hours over hostile seas, trusting their lives to an aircraft that was never supposed to be great, just dependable. Instead, it became legendary. Its design told a story of how human ingenuity, when married to courage and persistence, can overcome even the most skeptical beginnings. And its record, the highest kill ratio of any U.S. torpedo bomber, remains unchallenged, not because of luck or chance, but because of engineering foresight and the human determination behind it. In an age where stealth, automation, and digital precision dominate, the Grumman Avenger stands as a timeless example that true strength in warfare comes not from simplicity, but from purposeful complexity, from machines built not just to fight, but to endure. In the years following the war, the name Avenger took on a meaning far beyond the aircraft itself. It became a symbol of American industrial brilliance, a reminder that innovation often hides behind layers of skepticism and doubt. Leroy Grumman, the man who had once been mocked by rival designers for making an aircraft too big, too heavy, and too expensive, suddenly found himself celebrated as one of the geniuses of wartime aviation. Government officials and naval officers who had once hesitated to greenlight the Avenger program began to cite it as a model for how engineering vision could overcome bureaucracy. Grumman's Design Bureau became the backbone of post-war naval aircraft development, producing legends like the Hellcat, Panther, Cougar, and later the F-14 Tomcat, each echoing the Avenger's principles of durability and pilot protection. Inside Grumman's factory in Bethpage, New York, workers proudly painted banners that read, "The plane that brought them home." For them, the Avenger wasn't just another war machine, it was living proof that American craftsmanship, when tested by fire, could produce something both deadly and humane. It killed effectively, but it saved lives even more effectively, and that paradox became its enduring legacy. Politically, the Avenger's influence was just as profound. When the U.S. Navy transitioned into the Cold War, the lessons from the Avenger directly shaped budget priorities and procurement philosophies. Lawmakers and admirals alike realized that complexity, when intelligently applied, could save thousands of lives and billions in losses. The Avenger's success gave birth to what would later be called the Grumman Standard, a philosophy that encouraged manufacturers to design not only for mission capability but for crew survival and long-term adaptability. It changed the way contracts were written, the way testing was done, and the way naval aviation integrated new technologies. Even in congressional hearings decades later, officials would cite the Avenger as a model of cost-effective versatility, a plane that justified every penny of its overengineering. When President George H. W. Bush, himself a former Avenger pilot, took office in 1989, he often referenced his wartime experiences flying the Turkey. He spoke of the aircraft not as a piece of metal, but as a companion that had protected him amid fire and fear. His words resonated deeply within the Navy community, reminding Americans that the true measure of a weapon is not how easily it's built, but how faithfully it brings its people home. Today, more than 80 years after its first flight, the Avenger still flies, not in combat, but in memory. Restored examples roar across the skies at airshows, their wings glinting in sunlight as veterans salute from below. Museums like the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola and the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum preserve these aircraft with reverence, their metal skins polished to mirror the courage of the men who once flew them. Each surviving Avenger tells a story written in oil, salt, and smoke, of young crews who trusted a machine others doubted, of designers who believed complexity could be a form of compassion, and of a nation that learned that true engineering brilliance lies not in simplicity, but in purpose. As spectators watch the aircraft climb into the air, trailing that unmistakable roar, they are reminded that the Avenger's highest kill ratio wasn't merely a number in a record book, it was the result of faith, design, and endurance working together under impossible circumstances. It stands as proof that even the most overcomplicated ideas can become legends when guided by vision, courage, and the relentless pursuit of excellence.